It was Shakespeare that first wrote, "All that lives must die." And it was Turritopsis dohrnii, the immortal jellyfish, that responded, no, I don't think I will. Death isn't just a certainty for most life forms, it's a necessity. It contributes to ecosystems, controls populations, and drives natural selection. So why would the immortal jellyfish, and several other organisms for that matter, have evolved the capacity to live forever? Today, I'm gonna go over the 4 different types of immortality found in nature, how they work, and how they can inform us about anti-aging treatments in humans. Just how far away are we from living forever? Well, don't die before this video ends and maybe you'll find out. Let's start by making the distinction between chronological age and senescence, the deterioration of an organism that happens over time, sometimes referred to as biological age. When people talk about anti-aging treatments, they really mean anti-senescence treatments. In fact, the goal is precisely to age without senescing. And it turns out plenty of animals can do just that. Negligible senescence is the first and most common type of immortality that we'll be discussing. Rather, it's a method to hypothetically achieve immortality. Greenland sharks have the longest lifespan of any known vertebrate, from 250 to 500 years. In comparison, the oldest tortoise in the world is currently 192 years old. His name is Jonathan, by the way. I just thought you should know that. But yeah, Greenland sharks can get very old. They reach sexual maturity at 150 years old. When they're pregnant, their gestation period can take anywhere between 8 and 18 years. And they on average grow to be bigger than great white sharks, because why not? Researchers took enzymes from sharks from 60 to 200 years old and used them to measure their metabolic activity. In most animals, this would be expected to decline substantially with age, but they found that Greenland shark metabolisms don't show any change at all. This appears to be the secret to their longevity, a metabolic system that never appears to decline with old age. In humans, metabolic activity steadily declines with age, though there is evidence that this can be prevented through diet, resistance training, and certain therapies. Seeing as how these things also correlate with longevity, maintaining an active metabolism may be a core mechanism that allows us to slow down senescence. But this is something that we can learn a lot more about by studying Greenland sharks. Research on them is both slow and difficult, as they're a vulnerable species that has a low population density to begin with. Very Greenland of them. This is the Hydra, a genus of freshwater animals that share ancestry with jellyfish. Despite their size, they are ruthless predators, using their tentacles to sting and release neurotoxins that paralyze their prey. Hydras have been popularly cited as animals that can be considered biologically immortal, as their cells are capable of infinite self-renewal. We'll get into why our cells aren't capable of this in a bit, but for now, just know that this is a remarkable thing to do. Even better than the Lernaean Hydra of Greek myth, the real-life counterpart can fully regenerate its body from only a small fragment. Scientists have identified the transcription factor FOXO as the driving force for the Hydra's infinite rejuvenation. They did this by experimentally removing several genes and factors and seeing what would happen. And when FOXO was downregulated, Hydras appeared to die more often and reproduce less frequently. It turns out all other animals have FOXO genes. Invertebrates have one copy of the FOXO gene, and when downregulating this, we find that their lifespan significantly decreases. In vertebrates, this gets a little more complicated because we have 4 FOXO genes. FOXO 1, 3, 4, and 6. Don't ask me what happened to 2 and 5. I don't know. We know that these genes have downstream effects on human longevity, but they also do a whole bunch of other things as well. So the goal is to disentangle these effects to get a better idea of how FOXO impacts human lifespan. There's a lot of exciting research on that right now, and we have the Hydra to thank for that. Some other animals that show negligible senescence are Olms salamanders, Aldabra giant tortoises, which is what Jonathan is, red sea urchins, rough-eye rockfish, freshwater pearl mussels, and ocean quahog clams. Of course, lots of trees are like this as well. The oldest tree in the world, which has been standing for almost 5,000 years, is the bristlecone pine Methuselah, named after the biblical guy who supposedly lived for 969 years. Though we've been given a lot of hints about aging by studying animals, the exact mechanisms that cause senescence in humans are still a mystery. There are literally hundreds of theories ranging from DNA damage to the accumulation of mutations to to our immune systems being pre-programmed to shut down, but none of them seem to be entirely satisfactory on their own. There are just so many different factors that contribute to age, some of them unknown and some of them we don't have time to get into, but there is one that absolutely needs to be highlighted, and it has to do with these things called telomeres. In 1912, Nobel Prize-winning scientist Alexis Carrel conducted an experiment where he started a culture of embryonic chicken cells, and by regularly supplying nutrients to it, he was able to keep it alive for over 20 years, much longer than a chicken's typical lifespan. With these results, Carrel stated that all cells explanted in tissue culture are immortal, and a lack of continuous cell replication is due to ignorance on how best to cultivate them. Basically, he said, if you can't keep your cells alive forever, you're bad and you should feel bad. This was accepted as fact for the next 40 years, until a scientist named Leonard Hayflick noticed that his culture of human fibroblasts had slowed their rate of division and eventually died. At first, he assumed this to be due to some kind of technical error, until he noticed it again, and he found that pretty suspicious. So Hayflick decided to run a formal experiment, and found that human cells could consistently only double about 40 times before they were no longer able to, and that they had some way of remembering how many times they'd replicated in the past. Ironically, it's this experiment that's been replicated time and time again, while no one's been able to replicate Carrel's original experiment. It's presumed that Carrel contaminated his culture while introducing nutrients, and some people even think he did this intentionally. But Hayflick's experiment proved that indeed, human cells are not immortal, and that they have a hard limit to the number of times they can reproduce, about 40 to 60 times, the Hayflick Limit. Today, we finally know the reason why. At the ends of our chromosomes are repetitive nucleotide sequences called telomeres. When a cell replicates and all of its chromosomes are copied, telomeres mark where chromosomes should end and prevent them from being frayed and tangled. The issue is, throughout this process, the telomeres are cut and get slightly shorter every single time. Eventually, DNA polymerase, the main enzyme involved in copying DNA, isn't able to attach to the ends of chromosomes, and so cells stop being able to reproduce. This is referred to as the end replication problem, and it's the reason behind cellular senescence, which is a huge problem in trying to make humans immortal. Which brings us to lobsters. Lobsters don't just avoid senescence, they actually just continue to grow indefinitely and even get more fertile with age. Every once in a while though, their soft insides get too big for their hard outsides, and so they have to molt their exoskeletons in typical invertebrate fashion. This is a process that requires a lot of energy, and it only gets more and more metabolically expensive as the individual increases in size. So eventually they simply get too large and don't have the energy to move or molt and just kind of die. About 10% of lobsters meet this fate in the wild. Others get killed by predators or succumb to shell disease or end up on my dinner plate, but none have ever died due to telomere shortening. This is because of an enzyme called telomerase, which has the ability to restore telomeres, allowing for infinite replication. This telomerase expression makes lobsters a very unique case where lifespan is limited by size rather than senescence. So it's hypothesized that if we could provide a lobster with all the energy it could need to molt and grow forever, it should be theoretically immortal. Though it should be noted that this has never been done before, and the oldest a lobster has ever been known to live is currently 72 years.
Correction, this is George. He lived until 140.
So why don't we have telomerase? It sounds like an absolute cheat code. The answer is that we do. It's just heavily restricted. Think about this. Telomerase allows cells to never die and proliferate forever. What do we call cells that refuse to die and continuously replicate? Yeah, it's cancer. The vast majority of malignant tumors have found a way to increase their levels of telomerase. And the more times a cell replicates, the more chances it has to accumulate cancerous mutations. It's a good thing that our cells aren't immortal here. Having a set limit of replication ensures that cells that have the potential to become cancer cells die before they're able to. Telomerase also plays an important role in embryonic stem cells, probably because they need to consistently proliferate at high rates, and so it's not very useful to turn it off there. Adult stem cells also have some telomerase, but not nearly enough to solve the end replication problem. There's a reason embryonic stem cells has been a very popular area of clinical research, both as a regenerative treatment and as a research model. But this is also why some strains of cancer are used for research as well. HeLa is an immortalized cell line line derived from cervical cancer cells in 1951, and it's been used in research ever since. HeLa cells were the first human cells to ever be successfully cloned, and they were used to test the first polio vaccine before it was ready for human trials. So all of this kind of begs the question, wouldn't it be better to have more telomerase expression and then just also have more cancer resistance on top of that? Well, yeah, but as I say on this channel all the time, evolution doesn't strive for what's better, but for what's good enough. And what we have going on now is more than good enough. Only a couple hundred years ago, the expected lifespan of a man was about 30 years. Can you imagine that? I should be having a midlife crisis right now. In fact, I think I'm gonna start. But today, modern medicine has vastly increased our lifespan to a degree comparable to some of the longest lived organisms on Earth. What would be the point of immortality when throughout all of our evolutionary history, people were constantly dying to disease, predation, and competition? This is like the whole point of reproduction. It allows life to persist better than trying to keep the same individual alive forever, because individuals die randomly all the time. This is why we even see cases where reproduction is valued above living. Adult mayflies live for a single day, mate in the air, and then instantly fall dead. Male praying mantises let their heads be eaten while their body is in the middle of ejaculation. And male redback spiders somersault into their partner's mouths during sex for the same reasons. It takes a lot of energy to stay alive. If that energy is better expended on making a new life, then that's often where it'll go. Of course, if that energy is better spent on longevity, then it can also go there. It's just whatever works for the context of the species. In Bosnia-Herzegovina, researchers regularly entered a cave to study Olms. They came to realize that oftentimes the Olms were in the exact same spot in subsequent cave visits. The record for how long an Olm stayed still in a single place? 7 years. Bro was just chilling doing nothing for 7 years. Some lifestyles support living longer a lot more than other ones. And in these cases, immortality can just show up as a side effect. But at the start of this video, I said we'd be talking about 4 types of immortality. We've only talked about negligible senescence so far, but that's because it's by far the most common and relevant to us. These next 3 are a lot more niche and a lot more alien. Before we jump in, if you're enjoying this video, consider leaving a comment and subscribing. It takes me a long time to make these videos, and I have a puny human lifespan, so I would really appreciate it. But okay, it's time to talk about the immortal jellyfish, the only example of negative senescence across the tree of life. Slowing down your aging is one thing, it's a whole nother thing to reverse it. To be younger again, because youth is wasted on the young. This is what Turritopsis dohrnii can do, and to properly explain this, we need to go through the jellyfish life cycle. The big squirmy plastic bags that you picture when you think jellyfish is actually only the adult stage, called the medusa. Medusae have sex by releasing sperm and eggs from their mouths, which meet in open water and create fertilized eggs. This egg then develops into a planula, a tiny pear-shaped thing which finds a firm surface and attaches itself. Here, it grows into a polyp, a stationary creature with a mouth and tentacles which they use to catch and feed on zooplankton in the water. When they've matured enough, polyps undergo one of 2 pathways. They may divide in half and produce a genetically identical polyp, or a young adult jellyfish, called an ophyra, will bud off of it, going into open water and developing into a fully formed medusa. You can really see the ancestral ties that jellyfish have with hydras, because hydras are just polyps that found more success staying that way instead of swimming around and stinging people. What makes T. dohrnii so unique is that it can go from a medusa back into a polyp. This happens when the medusa is exposed to physical damage, adverse environmental conditions, or senescence. It enters a reverse metamorphosis, landing on the ground and turning into a cyst-like thing which eventually becomes a polyp again, creating new polyps and eventually another medusa. Polyps and medusae have different types of cells, just like how our skin cells and our stomach cells are different. So in order for T. dohrnii to use this, they use transdifferentiation, the process of a cell changing its fate and becoming another type of cell. Transdifferentiation is incredibly rare. It's been induced on human cells before through experimentation, but otherwise it's really not something that happens commonly in nature. Now, something that most science communicators try to hide is that we've never actually seen an immortal jellyfish medusa turn into a polyp in the wild. It's only been seen in the lab. Now, that might just be because they're small, only 10 millimeters in diameter, but it's also likely that the jellyfish get preyed upon before they have the chance to transdifferentiate. Regardless, this is an exceptional example of cellular rejuvenation that just seems to break all the rules. While not quite the same, we also see impressive regenerative abilities in Planarian flatworms. These creatures have been called immortal under the edge of a knife, because if you cut a tiny slice off their body, as little as 1/279th of it, that piece will regenerate into a full flatworm in only a few weeks. That means that you can dice a single flatworm up into pieces and get 279 of them to regrow. Once, a researcher cut a Planarian's head in half, and both sides regenerated into a new head, and so it just kinda lived on with two heads. For some reason, this also happens when Planarians regenerate in space. Something about outer space makes Planaria regenerate with two heads, while this almost never happens naturally on Earth. I bring this up for no particular reason, it's just fucking weird, I don't know. But yeah, insane levels of regeneration is another way to stay alive forever. The closest thing humans have to this are embryonic stem cells, but they aren't even close to Planarian regeneration, and they're definitely not close to what the immortal jellyfish can do either. So unfortunately, the probability that we ever give someone a Wolverine-level healing factor is slim to none. Every tree in the forest you're looking at is part of a single organism, because they're all identical clones connected by a shared root system. This is Pando, the largest and oldest quaking aspen in the world. Covering over 100 acres of land with 47,000 connected trees, Pando is the largest organism in the world by mass. It's also estimated to be 14,000 years old. So earlier when I talked about Methuselah, I should have noted that it was the oldest non-clonal tree, because Pando is by far the oldest tree. Aspen trees spawn through a process called vegetative reproduction, a type of asexual reproduction where new identical plants grow from a fragment of a parent plant, allowing a single individual to proliferate into an entire forest, a clonal colony. Other clonal colonies include Poseidonia australis, or fiberball weed, a kind of seagrass that clones itself into large meadows in the southern waters of Australia. In Shark Bay, a single colony is the largest plant in the world by area, covering about 200 square kilometers. King's Lamatia is an endangered plant found in Tasmania. Actually, it's so endangered that it's the only one left. This nameless colony is thought to be 43,000 years old and is only still around because it's a clonal colony. It's an entire species kept from extinction by a single individual constantly replicating itself. There's also a mushroom I feel I should mention, Armillaria astoye, that proliferates in a similar fashion to vegetative reproduction, but in a more fungusy way. It primarily grows underground and sprouts surface fruits called honey mushrooms. Because it barely competes for land and nutrients, colonies of A. astoye can grow insanely large. One colony in Michigan, named Humongous Fungus, has been estimated to cover over 10 square kilometers and weigh 35,000 tons. And it's thought to be 8,500 years old. As you can see by these age ranges, clonal colonies appear to just be immortal. By copying themselves over and over again, they're like a cell culture with infinite telomeres. There is some contention about calling them immortal though, because is a clonal colony really just a single individual? Or is it multiple individuals that happen to share the identical genetics? Well, if you died, but a perfect clone of you was made with all of your memories and personality traits, are you still alive? This idea shows up a lot in sci-fi media, and it's more of a philosophical and semantic query than a biological one. Most biologists agree to refer to clonal colonies as a single individual and just understand the nuance there when necessary. Okay, finally we have cryptobiosis, a completely static state in response to extreme conditions, where all metabolic processes in an organism stop. Here, organisms lay dormant until favorable conditions are met in which they can be revived again. I talked about a few different kinds of cryptobiosis in my extremophile video, including the viable but non-culturable state that some bacteria can enter when frozen in ice, and anhydrobiosis, the complete drying up through a lack of water. There's also anoxybiosis, which happens under low levels of oxygen. Tardigrades are known to have been exposed to the vacuum of space and still be alive when brought back to Earth, continuing to produce viable offspring. Many bacteria, archaea, and other microorganisms are capable of this as well. Contrary to how we often sell this isn't really the organisms surviving in outer space. More so, they're entering cryptobiosis, which is a state not unlike death, and reviving again once they're brought back to the planet with help from humans. Lots of cryptobionts are suggested to be able to live for tens of millions of years, or perhaps even infinitely, and still be able to revive afterwards. This is why people are afraid of million million-year-old pathogens frozen in the ice, which will eventually emerge one day and spread amongst us as a deadly disease. But again, there's a bit of a discussion to be had here about whether we can consider this true immortality. Is cryptobiosis a dormant state of being alive? Or is it a temporary state of being a non-living object? Is it survival or just reversible death? Personally, I think this demonstrates how arbitrary the separation we make between life and non-life really is. We talk about it like it's binary, where life is this special property that fundamentally separates us from non-living things, when in reality, life is just an arrangement of chemicals, just like any other formation of matter that just happens to be able to self-replicate. If a life is simple enough that these chemicals can be paused, then reactivated later, it's not alive, then dying, then reviving, it's just simply how those chemicals work. Cryptobiosis is the basis to the classic human immortality treatment, the cryogenic freezing chamber. The idea that if someone is frozen enough, their living sort of pauses, and then when they're unfrozen, they wake up in the new futuristic world. In real-life practice, this is called cryonics. Some people pay $20,000 to $200,000 to be frozen and preserved, so that when future technology develops, it can be applied to them and they can be brought back to life. This is an incredible scam, a huge waste of money, and likely just impossible. Maybe if you were cooled to absolute zero, it would work, but the chances of that are absolutely zero. Now, there is cryotherapy, which can be used to treat certain diseases and conditions, but cryo for extending lifespan is currently nothing more than the plot of Futurama. And this kind of leads me to the insane things humans have done in order to live longer. Recently, millionaire Bryan Johnson has been all over my social media for this reason. This is the guy who meticulously tracks everything about himself. He's tried gene therapy. He takes over 100 pills a day, every supplement under the sun. Actually, I take that back, because he completely avoids being under the sun as another one of his practices. He also received a plasma transfusion from his son and tracks both of their erection data, because that's totally a sane thing to do, and then shares it on Twitter. He claims to do things based on current science, but most of the experts in the aging field just don't seem to be on board with him.
Now, I do just want to say, Bryan Johnson does have a lot of positive qualities as well. He preaches and follows healthy habits, which of course will extend longevity. He's honest about supplements that do and do not work, which is more than you can say about some supposedly trustworthy scientists on YouTube. I do still have plenty of disagreements about what he's doing, both scientifically and philosophically, some of which I'm going to get into in a second. I was just editing right now, and I kind of felt like I was only saying a lot of negative things about him in this video, and I felt like it was worth highlighting some of the positive things as well, because he has helped a lot of people improve their lives. Also, check out my Bionicle next to Gara up there. It's pretty sick, right? Regardless, whether you like him or not, you do have to admit he's kind of a weirdo. I mean, the erection stuff is crazy.
But it's not like he's the first weirdo in history who's wanted to extend his life. Qin Shi Huang, first emperor of China, unified the country, forced everyone to speak and write in the same way, and of course, obsessively seeked immortality. He repeatedly sent groups of people to find him the elixir of life, or gain the advice of the 1,000-year-old wizard in the mountains, or build underground passageways between all of his 200 palaces to keep him safe from evil spirits. When nothing ever worked, he eventually settled on drinking whatever elixirs his alchemists thought might extend his lifespan, and so he died of mercury poisoning at 47. There are endless mentions of immortality in our stories, from Sir Galahad and the Holy Grail, to the Monkey King erasing his name off of death's list. Fittingly, the oldest story ever recorded features Gilgamesh attempting to avoid the fate shared by his closest friend, and ultimately failing and accepting his mortality. People have always been instinctively, existentially, and narratively afraid of death. It's only natural to want to circumvent it. But I'm not sure trying random treatments out of desperation is the way to do it. As I was writing this video, Bryan Johnson's documentary Don't Die came out. And after watching it, I think it's pretty clear he's severely mentally unwell. It seems like he has a lot of unresolved religious trauma, he's dealt with chronic loneliness and depression, and he has a lot of interpersonal relationship issues with family and previous partners. I mean, some of the things he says in this documentary are just sad.
I have found more relief demoting my mind and elevating my body than I have in my entire life. Removing my mind has been the best thing I've ever done in my life. I wish I had Talmadge's legs. He's kind of the perfect specimen.
And it's a bit concerning how many people are getting on board with this stuff, buying his books and his quote-unquote special olive oil and going to his meetups and stuff. It feels a little culty. I'm not saying he's just doing all this to make money, because he genuinely seems obsessed with this to the point of being mentally ill, but y'all gotta chill, man. I mean, this man spends so much of his time trying to live longer that he barely spends any of his time alive actually living. I get that he's rich enough to do this, but what happens if it's all for naught? Like, how much would it suck if he got in an accident one day? Or worse, had a typical lifespan and just died at like 80? We have learned a lot about aging from the organisms we discussed today, but we also learned how little we know as well. We have seen clear signs that organisms can be immortal, so maybe it's possible for us too one day, but we are a long ways off of currently achieving this. For now, we are no immortal jellyfish, and we'll just have to live with that and die with it too. Alright, hope you guys enjoyed this one. I worked really hard on it. Consider watching another one, and thanks for watching.